Welcome back to the New Internet Podcast. Elijah
Yeah,
Levine,
yeah,
Eric Swartz. We're just going to be chopping it up today, talking about end of quarter results for our companies as well as, other stuff we've been working on.
yeah. And I mean, we were just talking before we got on the recording here, ladies and gentlemen, and I just have to say it's probably one of the most active times for Black Mountain, for my family office, for Sterlington, for Web3 generally. I've never seen so much activity almost in the course of 2 weeks. I think I've seen more activity than I've seen in entire years. Like, which has just been insane. I mean, just the sheer amount of work Eli and I are doing together, like on various different investment transactions that we're working on, like 6 or 7 deals came across our desk that we're pretty excited about. And frankly, like most of the time we're not that excited about the deals that we're seeing. So like we're very, very, very not super willing to deploy capital into something that we're not huge believers in. It's just projects have really amped up their game lately, and I think the bear really is the best time to build. So we've really seen a lot of projects sort of really bringing out the end of that arc and showing you that having built through the bear, they're now ready to kind of launch into what could potentially be a bull market and be some of the most exciting projects for this next bull market. So would
Oh,
love
dude.
to hear what I wish we could talk about more of what Kyle and Eli and Black Mountain are specifically doing. Obviously we can't, but we will soon, and we're really excited to share a lot of that with you. But we do certainly have some alpha and some announcements we can make today, so would love to hand it over to Eli to do so.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, no. And Eric, I think I'm curious on one thing you said. Like, I agree. First of all, like, absolutely, in the bear market, the real gritty founders that are actually building valuable projects are the ones that are sticking around. But I'm curious, I heard you say, like, for sure a higher quality of projects, but would you also say right now in specific with kind of all the, recent action in the institutional slash traditional finance world, that there's a bigger quantity of projects as well, like as compared to the bull market, or not as crazy as that was?
Not as many, but much higher quality each project that we're looking at. The teams are incredible. The work to date is significant, and the minimum client deliverables are usually met and far exceeded, and then now we're like getting close to like a true public beta for most of these, or a mainnet launch, depending on how you think about it or what kind of project we're working on. So
Mm.
it's just a very different world than what I think we've seen in Web3 before. Like these companies have ARR, they have revenue, they are from sometimes traditional business lines and have pivoted extremely successfully. So it's just been interesting, man, to see the various use cases as they proliferate in a really accretive and also like rubber meets road kind of way.
Yeah, that makes sense. Um, so yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think, like you said, real alpha is found in the bear markets, and that's evident by like a lot of big tech companies. And I'm totally ripping this from one of my favorite podcasts that we were also talking about right before this, the All In Pod. Got to give a shout out to all those guys for the amazing work they're doing over there. It is so appreciated and so valuable, at least for me. I've listened to every single episode since the first one. This Week in Startups, Jason's original podcast, is like a longtime favorite of mine. Been listening to that one for years, hundreds and hundreds of episodes. And I just learn so much every time I listen to those guys with their nuanced takes, and the long form discussion I feel like is a great opportunity. Not that they're the first people to revolutionize long form content. We got Rogan, Lex Friedman, Huberman, etc. But just the fact that they dive into politics, business, tech, really all aspects of things is fascinating. And to that point, I remember a couple of weeks ago, Chamath was talking about how like Google and Apple, for example, were started during bear markets. And of course, those are like two of the biggest, most impressive companies on planet Earth. I think Apple just crossed a $3 trillion market cap, which is stunning. That's like literally more than the country of Italy. So I mean, yeah, just insane. And I think to your point, there's a lot of alpha to be found when people are running away from things. I talked with a good friend of mine recently who's a stunning, like a top tier real estate tycoon, but you've never heard of him, and I won't reveal his identity. But he was saying like during COVID, he was able to get land in Arizona for pennies on the dollar, like prime time, top tier land right next to the highway, mixed use zoning, like everything was perfect. And he was like, people were freaking out, running away, and he was just able to go in and get this parcel for quite literally what has turned out to be like many multiples of a return in a matter of years. And so it's interesting. I think it's a similar thing happening right now in tech, where people saw these absurd valuations, like we're talking 50, 100, 150x multiples on revenue, or even no revenue, being valued at 9 figures in some cases. And now I think you're being forced to tie your valuation to cash flow, which, coming from the traditional finance background that I do, makes sense. And that's how it's always been for us. It's like, okay, what is the EBITDA multiple? And like, we buy businesses at a 1 to 3x EBITDA multiple. Good businesses too. And of course, like, there's a factor of intellectual property and team and long-term vision, market, all that good stuff. But for the most part, it's like, okay, does this make money? Like, everyone has ideas, everyone can generate IP in some form, but like, are you able to extract value from it? And I think that's a position we're in now, where people are forced to take a hard look in the mirror for their business, for their personal lives, for their company, whatever it is, their project, and really consider, how are we going to drive value to this, and how are we going to make this something that people want and people are going to pay for.
100%. And I mean, that, like, having shared that like traditional finance view and also just reality, like world reality view. I mean, because like, if you're not profitable, like, I mean, conversations are just much less interesting. Like, I don't know how else to view it. And businesses have been priced using like financial metric multiples for like since there have been businesses. So I don't think that's ever changing anytime soon. And I'm just surprised that we got so far afield of that, like especially in the last bull market. Like, for instance, I mean, not naming any names, but like some of the larger investors in the space really just took down some deals that are, I would say, embarrassing, right? Like, I mean, like, there's just really no redeemable quality about some of the transactions that were done during that time. And so it's really striking to me that the folks who have been most disciplined are really actively deploying right now, and that the largest funds in many ways have slowed down significantly. So we'll have to see. I mean, and maybe that's just the reality of this space. Like, maybe what it's going to be is that it's much more likely that we'll have a new tier of investment managers that come into the field and really blow this Web3 world out, because I think that's becoming more and more likely, because I'm never talking to the large funds about the exciting deals. I mean, honestly, I don't even see their names in the deals most of the
Yeah.
time these days. It's real weird.
Well, absolutely. And a really interesting point that was brought up in yesterday's All In Pod was that the size of deployment is directly correlated to the size of the fund. And so for people like SoftBank with, hundreds of billions of dollars under management, or even tens of billions of dollars, like, writing even $100 million check doesn't really move the ticker. And so, similarly for other large funds that manage, hundreds of millions or billions, like, writing these seed stage venture checks is not really moving the needle for them in any meaningful way. And, it's interesting. I think two things you said that I want to dive deeper into is first, I genuinely don't think people understand how difficult it is to run an investment management business. Most people are not good investors, myself included. It's a really difficult business. It's hard to get right. It's hard to know when to enter, when to exit. That's why I'm so lucky to have Kyle, my co-founder, because he's the opposite. He's one of the greatest investors of our time, no doubt. He's 22 now, and he's already hit multiple hundred baggers. Like, I don't think there's many kids that can say that for themselves. And maybe even like, if you're hitting up 1 to 200 baggers in your entire career in the venture space, you're deemed legendary. It's just a matter of scale, really, until you break into the mainstream media, like people like Jay Cal and Brad Gerstner and others. But even then, it's just really impressive to be able to consistently hit winning investment opportunities. And then similarly, yeah, like 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, the SEC comes out, sues Coinbase, sues Binance, and everyone is like, oh, crypto's over. Like this potential investor in our fund is like, I don't know if now's the best time. Like, I'm really worried about the future of crypto. And Kyle's like, we just put all of our cash into cryptos. And I was like, oh, because we've been holding cash almost all of 2022. And so he's like, we are fully deployed now going for this opportunity, because people like that think crypto's over are exactly the opposite of what's actually happened. It's like the most famous Warren Buffett quote in all of investing: be fearful while others are greedy, and be greedy while others are fearful. And I feel like obviously that's so easy to hypothesize and theorize about, but in practice, it's so hard to have that discipline and to actually take action when times are hard, when things are not going well and seem scary, to take the leap of faith and invest at that time. Similarly, when everything's euphoric in like the last bull market, and you have things like NFTs trying to give away Lamborghinis, and all sorts of crazy projects and excitement and asset prices, and it's like, how do you recognize and have the discipline to pull out when things are so exciting? And so it's really just this crazy dance and balance that you need to figure out and establish for yourself. And in the crypto world, we've seen the majority of the competition go down. And I'm not saying go down like 50%. I'm saying like go down, like go underwater and go bankrupt and have to shut down their investment management firm. So it's a really interesting time. And I do think there will be some really strong players that emerge, but in general, it's going to be shaking a lot of people out more than anything.
I agree, and I think part of it is conviction is really like a one-way street. And
Mhm.
I think that what is unique about this space is you can have like some real strong conviction, and that will do you a solid, because you'll just, I mean, even if you're just DCAing in, right? Like over time, like that can really make or break a portfolio. And for those who aren't kind of operating at the investment manager level, like what I would say is just like think about it that way. A lot of this is never getting over your skis, like in expending more than you can afford to expend. And then also a lot of it is about really being thoughtful and thinking about which company or which blockchain in our example is likely to exist when our kids are around. And that's a hard question to answer for any investor. Like I mean, honestly, like if anyone says that they feel confident in the answer that they have on that, I would suggest that you place your money somewhere else, because the reality is very few people have made bets like that and really locked in returns. Rockefeller being one of them that comes to mind really well. I mean, he literally bought the entire like beachfront property in New York, and that was probably one of the smartest things anyone has ever done. I mean, and it has literally created a situation where the Rockefeller Foundation to this day still has a significant brand and does incredible things for this world. And that's the type of investment opportunities that I think exist in this space. But I think the thoughtfulness is really where the rubber meets the road. And Rockefeller made that bet a long, long time ago when that land was very, very inexpensive. And he had the forethought to think that that value would accrete in the way that it did. And very few people, because of the way these lots were not useful for many of the purposes at the time, that people would want to use land. So this was sort of unique to Rockefeller, very asymmetric bet. And I think it's a very similar opportunity set to what we have right now. So I think people should just be doing their research and really be doing the work, taking the classes,
Mhm.
learn what you literally. Wow, as I speak to you right now, Eli is also pursuing his degree at Wharton and managing a very, very significant portfolio. So what I would say is like there's a lot of learning that can happen, and there's no reason to not continue to pursue like the historical frameworks for investment opportunities, because if you don't understand what Rockefeller did, you're not going to be able to understand the power of an asymmetric bet. Because the reality is, I don't think anyone could have predicted at the time when Rockefeller made the bet that he would, I don't know, I mean, 1000x, right? Many thousand X. And that's kind of the forethought that I see in young managers like Kyle, like Eli, although he doesn't give himself enough credit. Because I mean, and I would love to kind of just talk through this recent investor update that you guys did. Of course, this morning I'm sitting there drinking a cold brew, holding my head, hunched over a copy of the Wall Street Journal, and instead of reading it, I'm reading Black Mountain's most recent update that you co-authored with Kyle. Really inspiring stuff. Anyway, so we're bullish on ICP, huh? Tell us more.
Yeah, definitely. So before we get into the letter, which we'll definitely dive into lots there, I just want to reiterate all the things you just said and bring up how intelligent they were. Earlier this year, I actually had the privilege of meeting the CEO of Rockefeller Group. And it's just like you said, the best investors, they think long term, they think in generations, they think in decades, they think in centuries. And that's what differentiates their success in the long run, is that they're not just looking for the most recent flash in the pan. They're thinking through massive societal changes. What is happening in the world at a macro level? Not only in one aspect of society, not in one country, not in one sector, not in one industry. We're talking all over the world, all over every part of society. What is being shifted? What is being touched? You brought up New York, amazing example. Such a fascinating case study of like an outsized return that we've seen in growth, in recognition, in prosperity. And I think another example is the internet. And that's why companies like Google, Apple, Amazon have revolutionized and become true leaders and pioneers in that space, is because they're able to understand the seismic shift that occurred, similar to New York becoming populous, prosperous, etc. The internet was a seismic shift in the way that we share information, that we do things, that we interact with every part of our life today. And so I think getting early to those trends is exactly like you said, how you drive that alpha. And as the chief compliance officer here, I also want to say that none of what we're doing or saying is financial advice. It's what Eric and I do this all for free. It kind of goes back to the cold intro, which it's like we want to help people. We do believe that there's a lack of financial literacy out there, and that's a huge mission with Black Mountain. And something we've talked a lot about, Eric, is like putting our best foot forward to help society. And I know that Jay Cal is like one of the most famous people in the world now, but I mean, that guy has inspired me for so long to do stuff like that. And, even yesterday he was talking about his, charity that he donates to help underprivileged kids. And like that stuff is so amazing to me. And you don't hear that in the mainstream media. And you don't hear about stuff like this in the mainstream media. Like, this is long form content. And the reality is, like, especially at these early stages of us doing it, like, not a lot of people are listening or hearing this. And I'm fine with that. If we can make a difference in one person's life, if one person is listening to this and gets inspired and, learn something from us in like even the slightest way, that's meaningful to me. And that's like why Eric and I are doing this. And we genuinely just want to make an impact on people's lives.
100%. And like a big part of the media push is to educate, because very few people have made a strong effort to bring the conversation to everyone and let people engage in a thoughtful debate about Web3, understanding the terms and in a fully informed way. And I think that's something that we're really missing, that we'll certainly see soon. But I mean, we're already seeing sort of what I've been really impressed by, which is the traditional financial players are really starting to like hone in on this space, launch really what I think are pretty strong applications for ETFs on Bitcoin, which is like exciting. I mean, some of the what I find most shocking about the media and about Web3 like trajectory when it comes to like fear greed, it, it is essentially like, even when there's a macro bear, we essentially just completely ignore the incredible things that are occurring in the ecosystem, which is insane, because like the UK just adopted a crypto regulatory framework like yesterday. We're talking about South Korea did the same. We had we have a state talking about holding Bitcoin on its balance sheet, North Carolina. We have so many huge like geopolitical and regulatory shifts related to Web3 right now, that it's hard to imagine a more ripe space for innovation, for good opportunities, like for those out there that are looking just for employment opportunities. Reach out. This space is really helpful with intros. Talking to a few people can help you understand maybe where you want to go within this space. Doing those things is really important. People are willing to talk to you. Like make that effort, because the reality is we want you here. That's what we want. We want more and more people here, excited, building, learning. Like that's what we hope to cause, and with all of the media efforts. And the reason why I started the Daily Post and podcast to begin with, like it's all about bringing this to a place where everyone can understand it a bit better, but in a really, really technical way, like in a informed way, because we also want folks to understand what it is that we're talking about, and be really thoughtful about not misleading anyone. So it's a real balance. And I think what we are certainly not trying to be is like a Twitter space or something like that, where there's a lot of information supposedly being provided, but very little fact checking going on, and the like this is certainly not that. And what we do is we we work like tirelessly to keep our research current, stay current for our investment activities, for our legal activities, but also for our own knowledge and for our own like stance within the ecosystem, because it's really hard to build and advise and understand without like being reflective and really being super thoughtful about how you research the space. So what I would suggest, I mean, if you even have like 15 minutes a day, just look at my daily posts for like that 15 minutes. It's worth your time. Click into the thing that most interests you, read the whole article. Like that's what it's all about. That's what it's for. And I know many of you have reached out to me and said that you've done that, and I appreciate you for that. And that's really what we're building here. We're just trying to build a place to help people get the right answers from people who know those answers like the back of their hand. And Eli and Kyle really embody that, and I think Black Mountain generally embodies that, and so that's why they're such a huge part of it. Because I mean, I have never found more like-minded individuals in that regard, and that's why I'm so excited to hear more about the letter. I read it. I was just really, really inspired by it. I felt I was feeling a little tired, honestly, yesterday, and when I dug into it, I was just completely reinvigorated. I had like another 4 hours in me afterwards, and I just want to give you a chance here, Eli, to talk to us a little bit about why I felt so reinvigorated, and I also want to just say, like, Eli is the only person I know that can channel Larry Fink as creatively and honestly build into something more than I think Larry Fink is even capable of. So you got to check out that letter to investors.
Wow, I can't tell you how much I appreciate those kind words, Eric. And you know, some people have a very contradicting opinion on Larry Fink, but you got to respect what he's done. And you know, same as the other really big guys, you know, that run those biggest and best firms. That's really what we're aiming for. You know, we want to build into one of the leading investment managers and asset managers of our day, but we want to do it in a more inclusive way, not only in terms of the knowledge like we're doing now, but also in terms of giving back and helping, you know, underprivileged people, giving back to nature, giving back to the military, giving back to, you know, foundations that are important to us. And so I think to your point, like, love the Daily Alpha so much. And I do read them and I try to dig into the details as much as possible. It's one of my favorite posts on LinkedIn. And I'm like, and Twitter, I'm like, why does this not get like 100x the views and the reactions, you know? And like people are just putting their like life updates or their opinions, like, oh, I went kayaking over the weekend, it gets 1,000 likes. And Eric like giving you free knowledge every day, like putting his blood, sweat, and tears into it, and like giving you highly valuable information. And it's like, I mean, people are seeing it, don't get me wrong, but it should be blowing up. It should be going like extremely viral. And I'm sure it will if we just keep being consistent with it.
We have our stalwarts. Like, we have a good base that looks at it literally every day, and like we'll randomly reach out. So like I'd say we're just early, like about that part, because there are some people who have honestly, like, and the community teaches us so much from that. Like, they reach out, we have a call with them, and like I've met so many people that way. And it's so funny too, because we're not an industry of like likers. That we're not just like, we're much more like reviewers, because like the views are like very, it's just very interesting to me, like some, because like sometimes I used to feel that exact same way, Elijah, and then I realized, like, I looked into the other categories and I realized that investors and traders are just not people who like things, but they are looking very carefully every day. So
Mhm.
like, and why not have the same alpha that the top investors in the space are looking at and using every day? I mean, we want you to have that too, and that's the whole point. That's why it's free. That's why it's right there on the internet, available whenever you want. If you want to learn more about the space, we're trying to take you on our journey.
Yeah, no, certainly. And it's a really good point. And I think that goes along the lines of what we were saying earlier related to the generational thinking, and people that care about making an impact not only in the world but in their own lives and being successful need to have the discipline to think in generations. And that comes with reading and reviewing and doing long form content. Like being able to sit down and have the discipline and the focus to listen to an hour and a half long podcast and be focused the whole time enough to actually learn something from it is difficult. It takes practice. Like my first time listening to This Week in Startups, you know, like several years ago, was I was a kid, and it's like, okay, you know, I might hear like 1 to 2% of the hour and a half or 2 hour long podcast, and I'll be like, interesting, you know. But once you start doing that more and more and training your mind to think about it and actually pay attention to what they're saying, it changes everything. And that goes for long form content as well. Like, are you reading or are you glancing? Are you skimming? Are you just reacting to boost the algorithm, you know?
A
And
hundred percent.
yeah, yeah.
And then the other thing I was thinking of, like as you were saying that, was like I guess one thing I find really interesting is that this ecosystem appreciates the alpha though. They really do. I've found that like a lot of love on Twitter recently, and I appreciate it so much. Um, I had almost no Twitter followers, like straight up, like maybe like 50 for the longest time, because I was just not a Twitter user. But like lately, I've been getting a lot of love, been trying to show up in spaces more and be helpful, especially more serious spaces that really are trying to drop that alpha knowledge. And I really appreciate you all for like really kind of teaching me a lot as well, because those spaces are super helpful. I was in a space recently where there was just like a bunch of investors in various industries, not necessarily focused on Web3.
Yeah.
And we were like, all of a sudden the financial proficiency and the financialized thinking increases so significantly, and you start hearing words like multiple and not like mainnet launch imminent. And
Yeah, token pool.
and and I love both, by the way. Like I mean, being one of the most crypto native human beings you'll ever meet, for someone who can't stand the technology, by the way, because it's just so damn hard to use. But I just love this stuff, so I still use it, even though I'm like technologically inept, and so I take great risk in doing so. Um, and and I just really enjoy learning about like these technologies, learning how they can provide us safety from really important things like governmental and geopolitical strife. Like that's a real problem. I think something that Eli and I talk about often is like the situation in Ukraine, and how that really taught people the value of holding your own keys.
Yeah.
I mean,
And a lot of other things. But yeah, just to tie it back to the letter as we have to wrap, I was gonna say, like, I love the daily alpha so much, and our quarterly letters are like kind of the opposite of that in a way. Like, of course, it's free alpha, but it's like really, really long form, and we put weeks, if not months, of research and time and dedication into curating these quarterly updates. And of course, they're like very promotional in the sense that we talk about all of our portfolio companies, our fund, everything we're working on, but we also try to make it educational. So to Eric's point, we talk about ICP. Kyle gives a very in-depth update there. We talk about real estate markets and broadly what's happening across the whole macro spectrum. But that's why I've loved the opportunity to do these podcasts with you, Eric, is because it's like more of like a pulse on the market, like every day or every week update of like what's actually going on right now, not what's going on at like the 30,000 foot level, which is kind of what we have to take into view for those updates.
absolutely, man. And I mean, that's so I love both. Like but I know very rarely do I publish on the latter.
Mhm.
Just because I've always done the other thing. And so I think that's another complimentary thing, because like I haven't gotten to like even like would love to work with you guys in the next iteration, and super excited for that. And but I haven't written my actual analytical thoughts on the space very often. In some ways I like leaving that out.
Yeah, yeah.
um like I like people, because I like to provide that in person situation. And I think but I'm really excited for the chance to like at least take an idea and show it like with some historical like true context, and bring us forward and show why I think that indicates something, for instance. Because like I mean, as someone who's worked with investors really closely my entire life, I
Mhm.
think I think I have a very different mindset on investing than a traditional investor, because like I've seen a lot of the mechanical pieces of transactions as a lawyer that kind of show you the likely places where things can go wrong. I think a little more than where investors sit at a much more macro level. And and it definitely changes the way you think about investing, and it changes the way you think about terms, think about trades, think about deals. Like that's for sure. But
Mhm.
then I think what makes me most helpful as an advisor or lawyer generally is just like my ability to kind of transition into that high level hat and think the way investors do. But I think
Yeah,
some combination of the two. And I think Eli
totally.
is the most detail oriented investor I've ever met in my entire life. And he really adds a depth of research and a depth of just general knowledge and willingness to learn that I just have very, very infrequently found in investment professionals. And it's so refreshing. And it's honestly, I think, why Black Mountain is so incredible as an institution, because with founding partners like you and Kyle, it's really important to have someone there to kind of keep their finger on the pulse of everything, but also really, really understand the deep, long view. And
Mhm.
I think that you have a rare, because like a lot of trading activity has to do with short-term views, and that's I think Kyle's world. But I think looking at the world in a very long format and thinking about general trends and helping you guys isolate the investment opportunities has first of all led us to similar conclusions. And I mean, if that's good or bad, we'll see. But I think it's good. I
Yeah.
think I think it's really good. And there's a subset of the space that has kind of arrived at similar theses to Black
Mhm.
Mountain, me, especially around compliance and like the ease of use that I think are super important. And I'm hoping are becoming majority views, but we'll
Yeah.
see, of course.
I agree. Like the combination is so important. And just to get into ICP a little, first of all, not financial advice once again. Second of all, I think we could literally spend an entire podcast just talking about ICP. I mean, this is one of the most interesting and exceptional assets, Kyle and I believe, that exist in the entire investment landscape worldwide today. And I'll explain why we think that, and I'll try to break it down just like Kyle did in the letter, because I think he did such an exceptional job explaining it. Even for me, there was an aha moment reading it for like the 20th time yesterday where I was like, oh my gosh, like this is insane. And so it really comes down to two main things: scalability and affordability. Obviously, chains like ETH, Avalanche, Solana, they're great. They serve their purpose. However, they can all be forked. ICP cannot be forked. In order to use it, you need to acquire ICP tokens. However, unlike ETH, for example, which costs $200,000 plus to store a gigabyte of data per year, ICP costs $5 to store that same gigabyte of data, and it's getting cheaper. And the reason for that is ETH, most people don't understand this, but Ethereum and other blockchains, really almost every blockchain out there other than the internet computer, is actually stored on places like AWS, which completely is the opposite of what most people believe to be blockchain and decentralization and all this. Like AWS is centralized. AWS is not blockchain, and AWS certainly is not decentralized in the sense that most people like think of a blockchain as. And so ICP is so different because it actually stores on chain, and it can do this using chain key technology, which allows it to scale really well. For example, and what really hit me reading the letter yesterday was that the entire Bitcoin network not only can be stored on ICP, but recently was stored on ICP. This was something that the industry previously thought would be absolutely impossible. I mean, storing the Bitcoin network on chain, that's unbelievable. Like this is a massive, massive amount of data. And the benefit, you're like, why does this matter? What is the benefit of that? And it's that you can actually start operating Bitcoin and doing transactions in Bitcoin at light speed. If anyone's used Bitcoin here, which I'm sure a lot of the listeners have, including Eric and I, it can take 15 to 30 minutes to transfer your Bitcoin over. Whereas with ICP, that happened in a matter of milliseconds. Like
If
you,
Coinbase doesn't steal your Bitcoin and not let you move them for like 15 years, like
right? Totally. No, it's so true. And it's crazy because, you know, not only in terms of the affordability as you scale, but just the speed in which you scale. Like Kyle talked about in the letter, which I think is probably the best way to put it, the three major paradigms that have happened in blockchain. The first was peer-to-peer decentralized financial transactions, Bitcoin. The second was smart contracts, the ability to verify information in a trustless way with both parties. Ethereum, groundbreaking, really groundbreaking. That was 5 to 7 years ago. The third iteration now is a blockchain that can operate at web speed. This doesn't exist in any way. And I know this sounds whatever and maybe not that exciting, but think about using social media. When you're scrolling on Instagram, you don't want to wait 2 to 5 to 20 seconds for your like to verify. And that's why centralized servers like AWS are so important and used by basically everyone in the world. Whereas something like the internet computer has actually built completely decentralized, completely on-chain social medias. One is called Discover. There's several more that every single action is stored on chain. So it's happening in milliseconds, all of your actions, saving, sharing, interacting with everything that you touch, all being stored and saved on chain for pennies on the dollar, for fractions of pennies on the dollar, and at web speed. And I mean, it's just really incredible because that can't happen on any other chain. And I think, you know, obviously, like there's a lot of excitement around other projects, and I believe all ecosystems are great, and it does come down to users, but you're seeing more and more developer commits to ICP. You're seeing the community growing, the ecosystem growing. So, I mean, time will tell for sure, but it's really hard to find anything that compares to this right now. And I know very little about the space. So it's like something that Kyle spent days on end explaining to me, and like it's been like aha moment after aha moment where I'm like, wow, wait, this is actually game changing. And even if you just use ICP, you can tell the difference. Like you send an ICP transaction, it literally settles in milliseconds, whereas any other crypto transaction, it takes a little time. You know, Solana is the fastest, but Solana is centralized. And so yeah, it's really interesting. And we have a lot to say there. Maybe we should interview Kyle, you and I, just on ICP, because I think he would probably explain it 10 times better than I am.
We definitely should. We'll have him on soon. But until then, I just wanted to say thank you for dropping the alpha as always, and thank you so much for coming on, Eli. Web3, we hope you'll join us next week to continue our journey, unraveling the mysteries and exploring the limitless possibilities of the new internet.
Dude, you're the man, Eric. Thanks again for this. I think this was a great episode, and I hope the viewers agree. Pleasure being here. Pleasure talking with you as always.